Hello everybody, this is Professor Ipshita Borat from St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, and today we are going to talk about how to make videos at home. Now, we are living in a COVID situation. You understand what I mean, right? And many of you might be interested in making videos at home. So today we are going to figure out how to make these videos with the bare minimum things which might be available at your own home. So let's begin by step 1. So according to me, the step 1 would be choosing a right background. Now what I mean by background, what you see at my back, this is a blue wall, right? So this is a wall which is right at my home and I'm using it as my backdrop. Nevertheless, there are other interesting choices as well which you may use for your backdrop. So for example, you may use paper rolls. Now paper rolls are available in market in various price range. So something as less as 450 to 500 rupees, you might get a paper roll, stick it on your wall and simply make it a backdrop. Now obviously there are more professional versions of paper roll as well, but what I'm suggesting right now is very homemade with the bare minimum money, what you can do to make an interesting video. So apart from paper rolls, the another option you might have is what you call a fabric backdrop. What is fabric? You simply use a very pretty piece of cloth which you might own, so a nice bed sheet or a nice one colored bed sheet, and you use it as your backdrop, right? So these are basically home, whatever available at home, and you can make nice videos at home. Or otherwise do something very, very simple. What I'm doing right now is use an interesting one color backdrop for your videos. Now let's talk about the first important thing. What do you shoot with? One obvious example would be a cell phone. You can use an iPhone or an Android phone. We'll talk about the settings a little while later. The other option is a camera at home if you do have one, right? And it can be of any variety. So nowadays, all the cameras, all the digital ones are basically function as a still camera as well as a digital camera. So the one I'm shooting with right now is a Fuji X-T100, which is a still camera and which is also a video camera and can be used for any of the purposes. Remember one important instruction. When you shoot either in your cell phone or any of the cameras you at home, try and shoot with at least 1080p and 60 fps. Now, if I'm not going to here explain the detail of these, what exactly you mean by 1080p or what exactly do you mean by 60 fps. Nevertheless, since this is just an amateur, this video is meant for amateur filmmaking, hence I will suggest that you keep the video. By the way, this particular specification which I just gave you is known as HD recording. Right? So what I suggest is whether you shoot in whatever devices, make sure you shoot at least in HD recording. This will absolutely suffice for making videos for social media platforms for sure. So next, let's come to framing, right? Okay, fine. So now you have a backdrop and you obviously have a subject, right? But what about frame? Where to place these subjects? Now, what do you look at this frame? Where am I placed, right? I am slightly, am I in the middle of the frame? Not exactly. I am placed slightly in one side of the frame. Now, this was obviously a conscious decision. The rule basically is, and yes, I'm saying rule, but then you can obviously make variations to these rule and figure out yourself. But the so-called rule is that you try and imagine and divide your frame with 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines, and try and place your subject at one of the intersections. The moment you do so, you will see that automatically your interest becomes much more interesting to look at, right? There is obviously a name for this, which is called rule of thirds. Yes, remember the name, rule of thirds. So what is rule of thirds? Simply that you place your subject at one of the intersections of the grid. Now often your camera also gives you an option where the entire frame gets divided into grid, and then you place your subject in one of the intersections. Okay. Another thing which you should remember is balancing your frame. Now you can see that I have added a small detail onto this frame. Adding details onto your frame is always an interesting choice. Nevertheless, the moment you add details, you will have to be very careful that your frame remains balanced. Now what do you see here? Is it an interesting frame to look at, or me alone in the frame was a better choice? Now what has happened here is, since I have added a detail to the other side of the frame, this has suddenly become a very, very unbalanced frame. What do you mean by that? If I simply divide the frame into two halves, you will see one half of the frame which consists of me. I'm also wearing a bright color cloth, and the other side of the frame is simply a very, very tiny plant, right? So this has made the frame unbalanced, and hence definitely this is not an interesting choice, right? Wait, that's not the end of it. So you learned rule of thirds and then you learned balance. Now let's talk about where to place your camera. Now in this scenario, the camera is placed right in front of my eye. So it's at eye level and I'm speaking right to the camera. This is a very, very common choice for people who make vlogs or people who are making social media videos. But there can be other interesting choices as well. For example, the camera can be placed right under me, right? So you take a low angle shot, or the camera can be placed somewhere up. This makes a high angle shot, right? So these are other interesting choices which you can make while trying to record a video at home. So I'm not going to teach you rules here, and rules are anyways very, very boring. What I'm trying to tell you is you can always experiment with where exactly you place your camera while you shoot your subject, right? So this is called camera angle. Apart from camera angle, you will also have to keep in mind the shot size. Right now what you're seeing me is a mid shot. What do you mean by mid shot? Mid shot is where your subject, so for example, I am a human subject. In this scenario, you're shooting me from head to waist, but you can also shoot me full length. So for example, you can see me from head to toe. This is what? This is a long shot. Or you may shoot only from, only my face, then that becomes a close-up. These are three common variants: a long shot, a mid shot and a close-up, and you may choose any of the one to basically frame your subject. Or alternatively, you can vary in terms of camera angle, and you can vary in terms of shot sizes and make something which is very, very interesting. The next important thing which you should remember while shooting at home is lighting. Light can actually make or break your footage, right? So in the sense that your video or the quality of the video will depend a lot on the lighting which you're using for your video. Now out here, actually all I'm using is some natural light. But before I go on to all the dynamics, the one important rule of thumb is that you should have enough light for your video, and obviously you have to do a little bit of Google and figure out yourself, because the scope of this video will not allow me to explain, but figure out what is aperture and what is shutter, right? So a combination of aperture and shutter which is there in your camera actually allows you or tells you how much amount of light will enter your camera. In your cell phone as well, nowadays a little high-end cell phones gives you an option where you can change your aperture and your shutter settings, which is basically you can actually fiddle around with how much light enters your camera. Now once you are sure about the fact that your camera has enough light, right, and that whatever you are shooting is perfectly visible, now you will have to go into the nitty-gritty of the lighting. But before that, one important instruction: never use flash. Why never use flash? Because flash tends to make the features of your subject very, very bland. Do you remember the marriage videos? What happens to those marriage videos? Usually in a marriage video there is someone who just carries a strong piece of light and then kind of brings it, shows it around, right? What that strong piece of frontal light, which another way around you may call as flash, what it does is actually removes all the shadows from your subject's face. Now when no shadows are present altogether in your subject face, the face becomes completely flat. This is something we definitely don't want for our videos. We want the shadows to be there. It's just that we don't want the unwanted shadows to be there. And for that there is a very, very interesting trick, and this trick has a name as well. This is called 3-point lighting. Yes. What is 3-point lighting? So the rule remains that you should have lights from 3 sources. Source number 1 is the key light. So for example, I am right now using this window for my key light. So the light from this window becomes the main source of light for my face, right? So you can see that there's a bright patch of light on the right hand side of my face. Now if you look at the opposite side, here I am using something very different. I don't have a bright source of light on the opposite side. So instead of using anything else, I am using something called a reflector, right? So what is a reflector? Reflector is simply bouncing back the key light onto the left hand side of my face, and hence it's erasing some of the unwanted shadow as well as the darkness which persists on the other side of the face. The other option is to simply use something like an LED light. This is a simple LED light at home. You simply use it and throw some light on other side of the face. Now you might think, what have I put here? I have put something on top of the light. This is simply to diffuse the light, because anything harsh, that is if the light remains very harsh on this side of the frame, what will happen is that this light will create additional shadows, which is something which we don't want. So we don't want additional shadows. What we want this light to do is cut some of the shadows, cut in the sense is to negate some of the shadows which are created on the left hand side of my face because of the strong source of the light on the right hand side, right? But apart from that, you can also use something called a reflector. So 2 lighting, right? So key light on the right hand side and the fill light on the left hand side. But apart from the key and fill, you will also need a third source of light, which is called the backlight. Now out here, once again, since I'm shooting at home with bare minimum possibilities, I don't have an additional backlight. But what you can do is simply use another piece of reflector and throw some light on your back. What will that do? That will kind of create a separation between your backdrop and your subject, and hence your subject will not look like it's as if it's merging to the backdrop, right? So with an additional background light, you can actually create more interesting videos, what I mean to say. However, if your key light is enough diffused, as in the case I'm using right now, so sometime you may use the key light only may also serve as your backlight. Now I felt that a backlight is not exactly necessary in this scenario, because I have a huge source of key light. As you can see, the window is quite huge, and some of the light is also kind of lighting up my back. However, this is always not the case, right? So if your key light is something of very focused nature, so suppose you are using a bright tube light or something of a yellow light, a kind of standing light, and using it as your key source of light, in that scenario you will need a separate source of backlight to light up your backdrop. Otherwise your subject will look like as if it is stuck to your backdrop. But these are some things which is tried and test method, or what you say, that you just flip around the lights and you figure out yourself that which is the best interesting light situation for your subject. Otherwise, you simply go ahead and buy a lighting kit, right? These lighting kits are available nowadays for something like 4,000 to 5,000 rupees, and they're very easily available. And these lights, you buy 3 pieces of light. Usually the lighting kits come in 3 or 4. There are 3 and 4 lights which are available in these kits, and they can work as key, fill and backlight, and then use the same for shooting at home. Another option which is available for shooting YouTube videos is something called ring light, right? So this is what exactly a ring light looks like, and you can simply use this light for getting an overhead light on your face. However, I will never advise you to use a ring light, because just like I do not like flash, for the simple reason that it kind of erases all the shadows, makes your subject look flat, I believe these fancy ring lights also kind of removes all the shadows and make the texture very, very flat. Okay, so next talk about what are the specifications of shooting the audio part of your film. But before we do that, let's talk about right now in this setup, what am I doing with my audio equipments. Now, as I've told you before, I am shooting with a Fuji X-T100, and my Fuji X-T100 has a inbuilt microphone. But you know what? It sounds like this. Yes, now you can already compare, right? It is in more or less not as good as the audio which you were hearing before. This is primarily because my camera is equipped with an omnidirectional microphone. What is an omnidirectional microphone? It's a microphone which is actually capturing sound from all around. This is something which is not advisable. Yes. So now we have switched back to the audio which is more comfortable hearing and the kind of audio we would like to have in our video. And I have attained this with the use of 2 simple equipments, nothing but simply my cell phone. Now the cell phone, what I have done in this cell phone is I have connected a microphone with my cell phone. You can see here I am wearing something called a lapel, also known as lavalier microphone. Now, what is the nature of this microphone? This microphone is a unidirectional microphone, which is not exactly catching the surround sound, but it is only catching the sound which I am speaking. There are other variants of unidirectional microphones available in market as well. So, for example, a shotgun microphone, right? So, always remember, or the simple thing to remember is try and use a unidirectional microphone while you are shooting. Now you must be thinking, but it's so difficult, you're shooting with something else, you're shooting the video with something else, and you're shooting your audio with something else. How do you match these two, right? So nowadays all editing softwares, so if you're using Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro, any of these editing softwares, these softwares come equipped with tools where you can simply match the audio and video. However, if you ask me that if you're not using, such kind of editing softwares and you're shooting with you're editing with something simpler, so for example, the freely available OpenShot. So supposedly if you're editing in OpenShot, how do you match the audio and video? It's simple, which is this. Right now, what did you see? I have used my hands for clapping, and there's this audio of the clapping sound. Now, what will happen when you are editing? So, when you put your video and your audio together, right? All you need to do is simply match the point of the video where my hands are attaching to each other with the clap sound. And once you do that once, the rest of the audio and the video will get automatically synced. However, if you find all of this very, very cumbersome, then simply do not record it separately. Use a unidirectional microphone, use a shotgun microphone which can be simply attached to your camera. So my Fuji X-T100, I can simply attach a shotgun microphone onto the camera and it will give me more or less very good quality unidirectional sound, right? So the sound quality which will be much better. Oh yes, I completely forgot to tell you one small thing. I showed you the cell phone option, right, for recording audio externally, but there are two more options. One a little expensive one and the other a more cheaper version, right? So the one option is, if you have a little more money to shell out, you can always go on for a more professional external recorder, something of this sort. This is a Zoom recorder. This is H4n Pro variant, and these are usually available in market for something like 14,000 to 15,000 INR, right? And you can record your audio in this, and this will give you also superb sound. However, let me tell you, the cell phone does not do any bad job either. So for example, right now I'm simply recording the sound externally in my cell phone, and then I will match my video along with the audio. I did not use my camera audio, inbuilt audio. That was because, as I have told you, it had an omnidirectional mic which was catching a lot of surround sound. Now another more cheaper option to use, now in case if you don't have a lavalier mic, right, what do? Do not panic, right? There's another very simple gadget to use. And sorry, I cannot, I'm not wearing one, or I'm not showing you the audio quality right now, but the quality is not that bad, which is simply use a Bluetooth headset. So you basically wear a Bluetooth headset and the Bluetooth microphone remains very near to your mouth, and simply record your external audio via the Bluetooth headset, right? You get what I mean to say, right? And simply match the audio and video. So you see, there was an expensive version which is a Zoom recorder, or a cheaper version which is simply use a Bluetooth microphone and once again match the video which you are shooting in your camera. Or go back to square one, use an omnidirectional microphone right attached to the camera in which you are shooting. Now these were some of the means or methods by which you can get excellent quality video. Before I go on to the next topic, I will definitely pinpoint on this matter that no matter how excellent quality your video is, if your audio quality is bad, it immediately makes your final product an amateur product. Audio is very important, right? That's why you always, in any professional shoot, there's a separate person who does the audio, who is responsible for the audio. Let me begin by something which I have already mentioned before. I asked you to shoot in a particular camera specification, that is 1080p into 60 fps. Now this is something which is called HD. So if you shoot with this specification, it will be called an HD recording. Now many of you must be thinking that your camera gives you a 4K option. In fact, why a camera? Many of the cell phones also give you a 4K option nowadays. However, remember, if you shoot in 4K, your file size, that is the size of the file which you will capture, will be enormous, right? And you will really need a large storage space to store things which you have recorded in 4K. Also, remember, if you are shooting for any of the online platforms, that is, if you're shooting for social media platforms like Vimeo or YouTube or just your Facebook, you definitely do not need a 4K quality video. It will just take an enormous amount of time to upload the thing. Forget about the storage. So the storage will take a lot of space, and uploading the whole thing will just be a humongous task, and it will simply be not required, right? So 4K is definitely something which you need if you're shooting for big screen. right? So simply an HD recording will be sufficient for you. In fact, the video which I am recording right now is not a 4K video, so I'm not shooting in 4K. This is very much an HD quality recording. Now let's talk about some of the other simpler things, right? So one thing is that your camera cannot be shaky, right? So you cannot have a shaky camera. This is a shaky video. We do not want this sort of a video, absolutely. Let's make it stable again. Yes, so this is stable. How has this change happened? Simply by two things. I have used something called a tripod, right? A tripod or a monopod is something on which you place your camera. If it is three-legged, you call it a tripod. If it is one-legged, you call it a monopod. This basically gives your camera a stable footing, right? Because if you keep it in your hand, obviously there would be some sort of shake. Saying that, I am not saying that you cannot use something handheld. What is handheld? Where you're shooting with your hand, that's a handheld. But be very careful when you're shooting handheld that there should not be like a too much shake in your camera. Another important thing to remember is switch on stabilizer. All camera, in fact even all cell phones, comes with a stabilizing option, which is basically where your camera itself more or less tries to, at most possible, making your image more or less a little stable. So if you switch on your stabilizer and on top of that if you use a tripod or a monopod, your camera will be stable. Now another option is, if you do not have a tripod, and something which comes very handy sometimes, simply keep your camera on a high chair, or simply make a stack of books, right, and keep your camera on the stack of book, right? Okay, so now we learned the setting, and now we learned also about the tripod factor. Another thing which is always advisable is, please do not use any of the filters or do not do anything at all to your footage while you're shooting on camera. So you might want your footage to be black and white, right? Or you might want a sort of Insta-ish feeling to your entire footage, right? So you would like to use those nice filters or those tint on your images. However, I will always advise, please do all of that in your post. Never do that while shooting. Okay, remember that. Next, and let me go back to the basics now, that some of the things which are very important for you to remember if you want to get a more or less decent picture. Number one is the amount of light. The amount of light has to be appropriate. Now, the amount of light is controlled by shutter and aperture. Again, I'm not going into the details of this, but if you're just simply recording with your phone, you will see even with your cell phones nowadays come with an option where you can increase or decrease the amount of light which is there in your image. So your image should not be low lit, right? Otherwise there will be grains, or your image cannot be overexposed, right? Or the image will be basically bleached out. We do not need any of these options. Remember that. So number one is lighting. Number two, focus. Focus is very important. So right now you are seeing me absolutely in focus. But let me now simply change the focus a little bit. And this is the slightly off focus me, the slightly blurry me. You don't want your videos to be blurry, right? So the focus has to be absolutely correct. Okay? Okay, so let me just go back. Yes, so now you again see me in focus. This is very, very important that your images have to be in focus. So we dealt with focus and we dealt with the amount of light in your image. right? Finally, another very important thing, though it might sound a bit technical, but it's something which is again very much available in your cell phones as well, is something called white balance, right? There is always a white balance button in your camera, and there's also a white balance setting in simply your cell phone, right? So remember to always ensure that before you shoot, you white balance your image, right? If you do that, your colors will appear the manner in which they appear to your bare eyes, right? I will repeat that for you. You want the colors to appear in the same manner the way it appears to your bare eyes, and for that all you simply need to do is press that white balance button before you start shooting. And remember, every time you change the location, right? So suddenly if you're going outdoors and shooting, you have to do that white balance. Obviously there is white balance auto options in your cell phone as well as in your camera, but remember that even if you're doing it in auto, be a little careful about these things, right? So the focus can be also done manually or in auto mode, or obviously the shutter, aperture, all of these things can now be done in auto mode, and our cameras are equipped with fantastic auto modes. However, if you want to be a little more sure about your image, you can always try out the manual options and check that more or less that your settings are absolutely okay. But before I go on to the next part, I would just like to state that do not be too puzzled out by these settings, right? Simply go with the trial and error method, right? Try these different settings, fiddle around with your camera a little more, fiddle around with your cell phone a little more, and simply, you can get the best. You can use the trial and error and see what image actually works best for you. Finally, I forgot to tell you one small thing. Now, most of you, when shooting with camera, you shoot in the vertical mode. However, if you simply shoot your videos in the landscape mode, that will make your footage much more professional looking. And on that note, we'll go on to the next and the final topic for this presentation, which is basically the editing part. And I know what all of you are thinking, that, oh my God, that's basically the forte of the professional. Now, for editing, there are obviously very professional variants of software which are available. So for example, you have Final Cut Pro, right? Or what is referred as FCPX. This is the Mac version, that is the Mac iOS version of the editing software. If you have a Windows setup, you can always try your hands in something called a Premiere Pro. So both FCP, that is Final Cut Pro, and Premiere Pro are professional variants of the softwares which are useful, which are required, or which are used rather for industry variant of editing videos, audio visuals. However, you might not want to learn them, and you also have much more user-friendly variants of softwares which you can first try your hands on before trying your hands in these upgraded softwares, right? So you can start with something as simple as Windows Movie Maker. All of you, I'm sure, are well aware of what is Windows Movie Maker. It comes equipped, it comes along with your Windows iOS, right? So in Movie Maker is a simple audio visual editing software in which you can lay your video, you can lay your audio separately as well, you can sync both of them, you can do a little bit of, you can use transitions in the video, and you can definitely make a wonderful, you can do the edit there and you can make a wonderful video, right? You can overlay music, but remember, if you're using music, please take care of the copyright part. You cannot use copyrighted music, right? So try and get hold of something which you have either made it yourself, or there are a lot of options in internet where you get royalty free music, and you can use these music along with the video you have shot and make something interesting. Apart from the Windows Movie Maker, which is really a very user-friendly option, I would also advise to try your hands in something called an OpenShot. OpenShot is again a user-friendly as well as freely available software. Simply download the software from internet and try your hands in it, right? Now obviously there is not much time in this particular video to tell you in elaborate details about these softwares, but what I would like to say is that there are a lot of YouTube videos available right now where you can learn these software. So if you have a little knack and interest in editing, believe me, these are not rocket sciences. These are absolutely not very difficult software to get your hands in, I mean to kind of learn editing. So start with something like an OpenShot, start with something like a Windows Movie Maker, and then if you really find interest in this forte, upgrade yourself to a FCP or a Final Cut Pro if you have a Mac setup, or a Premiere Pro if you have a Windows setup. Finally, I will conclude the session with these words that it's not exactly so much about learning the softwares. I believe if you have a little passion, if you're a little you can obviously get your hands on the, on the technical part of it. But what is inherently required is your inherent interest and your passion. So if you have that passion, if you have that interest in making videos for yourself, or for, for basically your work, for whatever forte of work you're involved with, or simply because you're passionate about them, you can definitely, with the kind of gadgets today we have, with the kind of user-friendly gadgets we have, you can definitely right at your home with the basic bare minimum things you have, you can make wonderful videos at home. With that, I would like to bid goodbye to you, and this was Professor Ipshita Borat from St. Xavier's College, Kolkata. Thank you.